Hi, folks. We got a lot to talk about. Claude's source code was leaked. LinkedIn scrapes your browser extensions. There's a horribly insecure messenger app going around, and more. All this and more coming up this week on This Week in Privacy, number 47. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we discuss the latest updates with what we're working on in the Privacy Guides community and this week's top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. I am Nate, and joining me again this week is Jonah. How was your week, Jonah?
My week has been pretty good. Thanks for asking. Besides misspeaking during the intro there, can't complain.
Hey,
How
we're
about you?
live. These things happen, right?
Yes, yes.
Alrighty. Yeah, I guess with that, we'll jump right into our headline story this week. And you guys have probably heard about this one. So there's an AI called Claude, Claude Code specifically, because there's a few different kinds of Claude. And I'm not a heavy AI user myself, so uh, I've heard that Claude is one of the better ones in terms of like the results it puts out are mostly accurate, it puts out mostly good code. That's just what I've heard. Like you could do a lot worse than that one, but we're not going to talk about that. We're here to talk about the fact that Claude Code had its source code leaked thanks to some human error. So to clarify, this is the source code for the app itself, the Claude Code CLI, not like the models or anything like that, but it still gives us a little bit of insight into what's going on under the hood. And I guess I'll go over it a little bit, but I'm also mostly gonna. I mean, we're a privacy podcast, right? So we're gonna focus mostly on the privacy and security stuff. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a recap, so this happened because when they published the newest version of the NPM package, there was a source map file, which I'll be honest, that's technical stuff that goes over my head. But basically, it allowed clever people who noticed it to access the source code. Like we said, it was 2,000, almost 2,000 TypeScript files and more than 512,000 lines of code. I saw somebody else round up to 513,000. So yeah. I mean, it's one of those, like once the cat's out of the bag things, right? Or once the horse has left the barn, because, everybody quickly went and downloaded this, and there's other repos are springing up, which we'll talk about that in a second. Anthropic tried to get some of them taken down with a DMCA takedown, a copyright thing, basically unrelated. We're not going to talk about it, but there was a whole like GitHub interpreted that DMCA according to the official story. GitHub interpreted that DMCA a little harshly and took down even things that were not supposed to be taken down. But yeah, it's been a whole thing. So I've also seen some pretty polarizing takes here, because I think it was this article. Yeah, this article said that its sophistication is, quote, both inspiring and humbling, according to some people who looked at the code. I saw some people on Mastodon look at the code and say that it was pretty sloppy and kind of shocking that it was so bad. But I mean, to be fair, Mastodon tends to be a pretty anti-AI crowd, so I don't know who's telling the truth there. But yeah. So, and then real quick, before I jump into an analysis part, we have like a follow-up to this story that's related. That says Claude Code leak used to push InfoStealer malware on GitHub. And this one comes from Bleeping Computer. Basically, once the leak was out there, a lot of people started putting up their own GitHub repos where they would advertise that this was Claude Code with all the paywalled stuff removed, basically. So free premium Claude Code. And they would game the SEO to make sure that it would show up in the front. If y'all are watching the video, you can see here, this one outlined in red is like the third result from the top on Google. And this is one of the malicious ones that the article focused on. And yeah, turns out, shocker, it includes an InfoStealer malware. I'm going to go out on a limb. The article didn't say this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it did work once you fired it up. But because usually that's how it is, right? Like it works, so you don't think anything's wrong. But when you install it, it's actually got that InfoStealer in there. And they said that there were multiple repos like this. So yeah, so cybersecurity takeaways from this. We're covering this as a headline story partially because this is a really big story going around, right? But there's a couple reminders here. One of them is as far as the repo thing goes. We always talk about making sure you get things from an official source, and not to go too far out of my way to pick on Google here, not like they don't deserve it, but we've been covering a lot this whole Google sideloading story, and Google is trying to act like, oh, this is all for security, right? Like it's dangerous to get apps from a third party store, even though the Play Store has plenty of malware on its own. But even so, like it's the point being is get things from a trusted source. You can get Signal, for example, does have an APK, but it's kind of hard to find. But it is okay to get it from the Play Store because that's a trusted source. There's also other places that you could get the APK directly. There's third-party app stores like F-Droid, which I know have some concerns about them. But the point being is like this is when I go to download something, typically what I do is I go straight to the developer's website and I go, okay, what are their official channels? And then they'll say, it's on the Play Store, it's on F-Droid, it's on GitHub directly, and then I'll look at the list and decide which one I want to use. It's not so much the channel, it's making sure it's official. So maybe don't try to get free Claude doing that. And then yeah, just the other takeaway I had was the whole source code leak thing. Anthropic was really quick to own up that it was a human error. They said here, what was it? Yeah, this was a release packaging issue caused by human error, not a security breach. Yeah, not like AI doesn't do this kind of stuff all the time, but it's just remembering that there is remembering the human element in everything. If you listen to any social engineering people, they're always quick to point out that humans tend to be the weakest link in any system. I could spend a lot of time if I'm trying to get into a building, right? I could spend a lot of time trying to hack the door code or the card readers or whatever, or I could come up with a really convincing story for why I need to be there, usually involving a high vis vest and a clipboard, in my opinion. But yeah, so I think those are kind of the more technical things that I took away. Jonah, was there anything specific about this story that jumped out to you from your expertise?
Yeah, there were a couple things that I noticed, and I was trying to find a tweet that I saw from somebody else, but I couldn't pull it up here. But I'll talk about some stuff. Going back to what you said about Mastodon, I do think it's interesting, like the supposed quality or sloppiness of the code, because I believe Anthropic has said for a while that all of their code base is now AI generated by all of their developers. That does, I think, at least bring into question whether you can DMCA or copyright any of this code at all. Maybe you can't because it's all AI generated, which AI companies have been pretty firm about saying, this is not like a copyright concern at all. So it's kind of a taste of their own medicine there that all of this is out, I think. Um, the main thing that I think we see in this source code, because of like you said, the models aren't leaked, but there is a lot of information about the system prompts that Claude uses for a lot of different tasks, um, which definitely gives a lot of insight into how Claude works and how to their competitors. I think it gives a lot of insight, like how you could make a similar product, and also to people who are trying to do prompt injections to bypass some of the restrictions in place in Claude Code. You can more easily see how they're implemented and get around them. So I don't know how people are going to end up using that, but I think that there is a lot of opportunity to for people to do something with it. All of the AI stuff. I mean, we've talked about it on the show before. Not uh, the most interesting to me from a security or privacy standpoint, because like Claude Code and all of these AI models, they're going to run fully in the cloud, so they get all of this information. I think it is sort of dangerous to be using and relying on, especially for sensitive information, and that hasn't changed from any of this. Um, but yeah, it's interesting stuff. The tweet that I was trying to pull up um, talked about how Claude and how Anthropic is using their AI to contribute security patches to a lot of different open source projects. And they've been doing that out in the open. Certainly, I've seen a lot of security vulnerabilities submitted to GitHub from Anthropic. I think one of the latest Mastodon security vulnerabilities and patches was submitted by Anthropic. So I believe I've seen contributions to that and to Firefox and a lot of other open source projects from them. Um, Unfortunately, I just cannot find this source, but maybe I'll be able to pull it up later. But I saw some information about internal tools that Anthropic is using, where the system prompt is like create these security vulnerability patches, without giving any indication that AI or Claude Code is used at all. Um, so it's like very specifically told not to attribute anything to Claude or Anthropic. It's told uh, not to include comments that might indicate it's AI, etc. So I think that that's really interesting that they are. I don't know what cases they're using those tools in. I would have to find out more information about that, but I think it's interesting um, that they are doing that. Yeah, it looks like you pulled up on the screen some of the
Yeah, I
instructions
found it
that I
on
saw.
another article from Ars Technica. I saw
Yeah,
that
I
too.
don't know where the original thing is, but yeah, basically they were saying there's an undercover mode. So like as you can see there, they're basically telling Claude that they're operating undercover in a public open source repository, so they can't contain any Anthropic related information. Um I can imagine that's probably used because a lot of open source projects are very anti AI contributions and anti AI pull requests, and just automatically close anything that's AI generated. So, this is probably a way for them to try and get around those restrictions. Whether that's a good idea for them to be doing or not, I guess that's up for debate. But it seems to be what they are doing, and that's kind of confirmed with this. So I thought that that was fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I feel very torn on that because on the one hand, um, there's probably an angle I'm missing here. On the one hand, I understand the idea of like, let's just assume they're doing that altruistically, right? Like, we want to make these open source projects better. We want to make them more secure. Like, I don't think at Privacy Guides, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't typically go out and solicit people to like, hey, come check out our website and make sure all this information's accurate. But we totally welcome it if somebody does come up and they're like, hey, I found an inaccuracy and they report it. And I feel like that's kind of what they're doing is, on the one hand, it's like it's still creating a more secure project, right? Assuming that the bug report is good. I know um, that's historically been a problem is a lot of AI slop bug reports that aren't really valid or they're not really bugs or they whatever the case. And semi-related, but I did see an article earlier this week that said that actually there's been a noticeable increase in quality on AI bug reports. So maybe they're starting to make some progress on that. But either way, point being, like, I understand the idea of like the end result is the same, and either way, it makes the project more secure. But it also feels very disrespectful of like, if I don't want AI reporting it, like, why would you go out of your way to hide that? And I don't know, it's a really weird thing, and I don't know how to feel about it. But I did see that too. That's really strange.
Yeah, I would be really interested to see data on like all of the security related pull requests or vulnerability reports that Anthropic specifically has reported because I feel like there's two different types of AI contributions to these projects. I think a lot of them are kind of slop contributions because a lot of a lot of people in the open source space or some students, for example, they want to pad their GitHub profiles because it looks more attractive to developers. I see that quite a bit where if you can get like a PR merged into a major project, it just kind of looks good for you. And so I think a lot of people are just spreading a wide net and just submitting a ton of AI slot pull requests and hoping that some of them get accepted, which is very annoying for open source maintainers. But on the other hand, if Anthropic themselves, if they have a legitimate interest in improving open source tools, which they probably do, because a lot of these big companies do use these open source tools themselves for a lot of different reasons, I can imagine that like somebody being like an engineer at Anthropic being paid to use AI and submit these pull requests might be doing a better job in not just completely submitting slop, but like using AI to find these vulnerabilities and write this code, but checking it themselves before submitting it and writing like explainers because they're getting paid to do this, unlike the people who are just, you know, rapid fire submitting vulnerability reports and PRs, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but I would imagine Anthropic would probably argue that that's true and would probably use that as the reason that they're doing this. And like I said, I have definitely seen AI companies report security vulnerabilities that were patched to open source projects, and some of them were major vulnerabilities. So there is some merit to the idea that AI can find these vulnerabilities more easily than I mean, I don't know if it's more easily than people who are auditing the code, but it certainly is happening. So yeah, I mean, if all of the reports that Anthropic themselves are submitting are accurate and worthwhile to fix, um, I don't know if that's necessarily a problem. But of course, people are all along the spectrum of AI and AI contributions and AI code specifically. So yeah, I think that's going to be quite a debate in the open source community for a while, and I don't know how people are going to handle that.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's a very it seems like one of the better uses of AI in my opinion, as opposed to like, writing songs or putting out blog posts, but it's still just yeah, it like you said, what would be the I wonder what the success ratio is, especially from Claude. And is there a human review? It doesn't sound like it from that snippet that I shared, but that's where I fall. Like I don't mind, and I'm not a developer, so maybe I just don't understand how bad the problem is. But like I would imagine I don't mind if AI helps you find the vulnerability as long as a human looks it over. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are not doing that, unfortunately. So
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about this in the privacy guides community, and when we're talking about all these different tools that we recommend, people really want to see audits, but they're extremely expensive. And if AI is not being used to like write new code, but it's being used as like a second pair of eyes to take a look at all of his code, that could be a good thing. It is not going to be perfectly accurate, but if we're being honest, all of these security audits that projects are paying for are not completely accurate or totally thorough either. And they're certainly going to be cheaper to run AI than have like a whole team of people auditing this code. So, well, I would imagine it's probably going to um, be worse quality and probably have more false positives if you're using AI. I do think that doing it and revealing some of these vulnerabilities is probably better for a lot of open source code bases than not doing any sort of audits at all and just hoping that the maintainer catches all of these bugs. So I can definitely see a use case here. It's a tricky situation.
yeah, for sure. I know it's not really AI per se, but I know, and you probably do too. I get the emails from GitHub every once in a while that's like, hey, there's a thing that you use NPM or whatever, and there's like a vulnerability. Go ahead and upgrade. So yeah, I would be I don't know. I mean, mine's just a static website, so I can't imagine the damage would be too terrible. But still, it's nice to get that proactive without having to go out and get a whole code audit thing. So useful stuff.
Hmm.
But I don't have anything to add to that story unless you did. Did you want to tell us about this next story out of California?
Yeah, so this one was reported by the Los Angeles Times. Their headline is California bill would require parent bloggers to delete content of minors on social media. Um, so they have a quote here from somebody directly impacted. It says, as the daughter of a social media influencer, Kami Barrett says she navigates life within a digital footprint she wished never existed. Everything my mom posted is still on social media, she said. Photos I wish never saw the light of day, private details about my health, even when I started my first menstrual cycle. She was saying this at a Wednesday news conference to advocate for Senate Bill 1247, which would require social media platforms to offer a process for adults to request the removal of content that features themselves as minors and was created by a family member who received compensation for sharing material online. Um, so yeah, this is an interesting story, and I guess it specifically relates to all of these family influencers that we see, which has definitely become more of a problem lately. especially I would imagine in California. Um, so it's interesting, but probably makes sense that this is only going to apply to kind of public influencers, ones who are receiving money or sponsorships in exchange for all of this stuff. But it is only going to be available for adults. So there isn't really a process that prevents any of this stuff from being posted in the first place, um, or anything like that. It's only a retroactive thing that um, adults can do about their childhood if they were a part of like a family influencer situation. Um, does I would say I don't know if that makes a lot of sense from my perspective because I think as we always say, anything that you post on the internet is sort of permanent. All of this stuff is going to be archived and it could be potentially years before you're able to take any of this stuff down. So children who are like uncomfortable with all of this going on um at the moment, I don't think have a lot of protections. And I don't know how that should be handled, to be honest. I know that that's been a debate that's been going on for quite a while, how children should be like compensated for that. Is that considered child labor? There's all sorts of laws, especially in the entertainment industry and in Hollywood and on the internet, that that come into play here. So I don't know if this is gonna really impact a lot of the people that we see in the privacy guides community who are trying to clean up their digital footprint, because I think a lot of people are more concerned about smaller scale situations than some of these commercial ventures that this bill is going to attack. But I do think it's a good idea for more privacy protections and some sort of process to get that data removed if you are an adult and you don't want that information out there. So it seems to be a good thing. I'm not sure how effective it'll be or if it goes far enough, but I think any protections and processes to protect your privacy are good at the end of the day. Um, was there anything you wanted to note in this article, Nate?
No, I agree with you. It's funny. I think most people would agree. I'm a lot more lenient with some privacy stuff than a lot of other privacy people are. But like kids are kind of one of the few things where I'm actually kind of like in a perfect world, I think it should be illegal to post pictures of your kids online at all. But or at very least publicly. Like, you know, if you're gonna post pictures of your kids, it has to be in like a closed group chat or like a friends only Facebook post. Again, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be Facebook, but that's beside the point. So like, yeah, this and I agree with you. It's really sad because like even in this article, one of the people they talked to said that I think it was that first girl, Barrett. Yeah, Kami Barrett. Further down, she says that she recalled being a target for predators and online bullying. Said her mother was aware of the problems it created, but continued to share her daughter's life on social media. So, like, cool, thanks. Now that I'm 20, 25, 30, I can ask you to take it down, but that doesn't help me when I'm 10, 15, 16, 17. You know, like you said, the damage is already done in so many ways. And um, I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. And it's one thing I thought was interesting is it says the legislation requires that social media platforms offer a process for adults to request the removal of content. And then basically from there, they pass it on to the parent, and the parent has 10 days to take it down. After 10 days, they get a $3,000 a day fine. So I don't know. It's really, I'm with you. I feel like it doesn't go far enough, and it doesn't, it's not proactive enough. But at the same time, I mean, I guess it's better than nothing. And I think that's, I don't know. It frustrates me. I wish it would do more, but it's a start, I
Yeah,
guess.
for sure. A couple things to note about this story. This bill hasn't passed yet. It's just a proposal. But the person in question in this article was talking about their support for it. Um, the other thing I would note is uh, similar laws do exist in a couple other states, including here in Minnesota. There are some laws that uh, here restrict more highly how children can participate in like commercial content in the first place. So I think if you're under 13, you can't actively participate in any of this content creation at all. You can maybe be featured in it, but you can't be like an active part in it. So I think that in Minnesota, at least, a lot of those toy unboxing channels where people have their children unbox a bunch of toys and that kind of thing, that's not allowed. Um, Teenagers here in Minnesota are allowed to participate, but there are laws in both of these situations around how that revenue is split between everyone involved. So there are some protections, I think, for people participating in these commercial ventures, but from a privacy perspective, I think they probably don't go far enough in any case. But it is interesting to see how this is being handled. It is a very, I think, new issue with the with the internet and everything that none of the existing laws were really equipped to handle around like child labor and stuff like that. So it's good that this is at least getting attention, and we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, it does say in California they have a law that was signed 2 years ago that content creators that feature minors in at least 30% of the material have to place some of their earnings into a trust that children can access when they turn 18. So, yeah, like you said, there's some it's an issue that's starting to get attention for sure. But I also, just on a personal note, they interviewed Allison Stoner, who they said was a former child actor who appeared in films like Step Up and Cheaper by the Dozen. There were also Isabella in Phineas and Ferb, and no mention of that. And I feel so offended because I love that show. I just had to call that out.
Interesting.
I had to. So in a little bit, we are going to talk about LinkedIn's browser scanning. So that should be fun. But first, we're going to go ahead and jump into site updates and talk a little bit about what's been going on at Privacy Guides this week. Just this afternoon, we dropped a new video. It is currently members only. So that we usually leave those members only for about a week. This one is about encrypted email. So this is another one of those like really beginner friendly videos that if you're a bit of a privacy veteran, you probably know this stuff, but hopefully it's something that you can share with your friends and family. It talks about why mainstream providers like Gmail and Yahoo aren't quite good enough, and how encrypted email works, and some of the different ones we recommend, pros and cons of each. So yeah, if you are not a member yet and you want to check that out, you can join on YouTube, or you can go to privacyguides.org/donate, and that will take you to a link where you can sign up for a membership. But that's what we did this week in the video department, and I will turn it over to Jonah.
Very cool. Yeah, another thing we did recently, Nate and I recorded this a few weeks ago, but it's finally live. We did a panel discussion on the Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons podcast. So episode 474 of that podcast is now out. It's called Privacy Guides Panel. Nate and I are on it, and we talked about a ton of interesting stuff. So I would definitely recommend checking that episode out if you want to listen to those discussions. You can look at the table of contents here. It looks like Nate's showing that on the screen, but you can find the Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons website for more information. And if any of those topics sound interesting to you, definitely check it out, because it was a ton of fun for us to record. I think we talked about a lot of cool, interesting, informative stuff. So hopefully somebody finds it useful, or at least finds it entertaining. In other news, we again published a bunch of news briefs that we're not covering here on this show, but you can find our articles at privacyguides.org/news about them. We have stories on macOS 26.4, improving security in the terminal app, a grandmother who was wrongfully arrested because of facial recognition, iOS 26.5 beta, including end-to-end encryption for RCS messages, Walmart, digital price labels, and more. So definitely check that out. Again, it's privacyguides.org/news if you want to read those stories. And let us know if you have any questions about them on the forum or anything else, because there's always a lot of discussions about these stories over there as well. Everything that we do at Privacy Guides is made possible by our supporters. You can sign up for a membership or donate at privacyguides.org/donate, or you can support us by picking up some swag, like this water bottle, for example, at shop.privacyguides.org. Privacy Guides is a nonprofit which researches and shares privacy-related information, and we facilitate a community on our forum and matrix where people can ask questions and get advice about staying private online and preserving their digital rights. Now let's move on to our next story. This is about Nextcloud and OnlyOffice.
That is right. So, full disclosure, I am a Nextcloud user and a little bit of a Nextcloud fanboy. So, I'm bummed to hear this story, but OnlyOffice has suspended their partnership with Nextcloud for forking its project without permission. And this comes on the heels of another announcement. So earlier this week, Nextcloud, Ionos, and several other European tech companies came together and announced this new open source project called EuroOffice, which they describe as, quote, a sovereign replacement for Microsoft with intuitive interface and strong compatibility backed by European open source community. OnlyOffice has basically claimed that this is a fork of their code. And they say that this violates license agreements because they offer OnlyOffice is source available or open source, and they use the AGPL version 3. So specifically towards the end here, if you're watching on screen, you can see this, but towards the end, it says we require compliance with applicable licensing conditions, including but not limited to the preservation of OnlyOffice branding, logo, and all required attribution elements as defined in our licensing terms, which if this is a brand new project, it would, of course, have none of those things. So for those who do not use Nextcloud, you may or may not know that Nextcloud, one of the things that it comes with by default is an online document editor or office editor. And there's a couple different ways to make this work. You can use Collabora online, or you can use OnlyOffice. And this has been, I think they said for 8 years, OnlyOffice has partnered with Nextcloud, and now they are terminating that. They do say, I think they said that no existing partners or clients will be affected. So basically, if you've already got it installed, you're good to go. I don't know what that means for updates and stuff, but yeah, I guess we'll find out. They also, interestingly, just to throw it out there, OnlyOffice said that in the past, and I'm quoting the article here, Nextcloud has behaved in a manner not expected from a partner, including trying to poach its employees and influencing customers against the company, but directly forking the project and repacking it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah, and then kind of a statement here. They said partnership is built on trust, and trust requires shared principles. Where those principles are no longer upheld, continuing operation is no longer sustainable. For this reason, we made the decision to suspend our partnership cooperation. So, and then just kind of, I guess, a little bit more background towards the end. LibreOffice has criticized OnlyOffice for being quote unquote fake open source. They say for one reason, OnlyOffice defaults to Microsoft Office formats like DocX, XLSX, and PPTX, which is Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, rather than open standards like Open Document Format or ODF. And there's also apparently Nextcloud says they didn't just collaborate directly with OnlyOffice. Let me rephrase that. When asked why they didn't just collaborate with OnlyOffice, they said that there were a number of reasons, including that OnlyOffice is a Russian company that tends to obscure its origins. Developers often leave code comments in Russian, and many users are hesitant to use software potentially linked to the Russian government. They also claim that OnlyOffice discourages contributions, ignores pull requests, and lacks transparency, since commit messages frequently reference internal issue trackers only. So, yeah, I don't know that I have a lot of thoughts on this one. Jonah, did you have any like what do you know about this AGPL v3, for example?
Yeah, so what's in question here is well, OnlyOffice says that they've added provisions to AGPL requiring certain attribution in forks of the project. So we could if I could share my screen here, let's see. Huh. So they're talking about in their license, two things. You have to retain the original product logo when you distribute the program, and they do not grant any rights under trademark law for the use of any OnlyOffice trademarks. And the EuroOffice project initiative basically removed these provisions, saying that basically, if I can find it here, Section 7 of the AGPL says that you which line is this? Says that you can remove any additional restrictions or any of these terms from that license on your own. And this is kind of the basis of EuroOffice's claim that they can kind of change this license, and they say that they don't have to use their logo to give attribution to OnlyOffice. The AGPL is still going to require that they provide some attribution somehow, but according to the EuroOffice project, they don't have to use the OnlyOffice trademark. I think that this is kind of interesting because usually open source projects like OnlyOffice in this position fight tooth and nail for forks to not use their branding at all. So the fact that they want them to use their logo is kind of strange because we've seen like Mozilla, for example, when there's any Firefox forks, they want to make sure that there's no Firefox branding whatsoever associated with that because they don't want it associated with their project. And related to this, there's actually another case around it a few years ago. This started, and then there was I think the latest update on this was in 2025. Um, but a company called Neo4j started a lawsuit against another company, PureThink, and about a very similar issue. Basically, Neo4j added a lot of clauses to their AGPL license, and Neo4j said that because the AGPL says that you can remove certain passages or restrictions that were added onto the AGPL, that they were able to do that. And PureThink actually lost this case. This 2025 article is basically announcing an appeal that's taking place. I don't know if that's actually gone to court yet. Um, but they, uh, so yeah, this article says that the AGPL allows added on terms like the commons clause that Neo4j was using to be stripped from the license. Um, and Neo4j said that because they added it, you have to comply with all of the terms of the license. And the court basically agreed that any terms in the license have to be followed, regardless of what the AGPL says. And then the Free Software Foundation and other organizations in the open source space said that that's not the case, and that they did intend this tenant or this provision in the AGPL to work and for these restrictions to be removed because they believe that you can't really have restrictions on free and open source software, which is kind of the point of the AGPL. Um, so it's a strange case. It's definitely in a gray area. And it really depends on how much OnlyOffice wants to fight this. But I think you could certainly argue um, in the Neo4j case and probably in this OnlyOffice case that any of these restrictions that are being added onto the AGPL that have like very specific restrictions on how the software can be used probably make the software not open source. So at the end of the day, you shouldn't be calling it an AGPL licensed project if you really want these terms to be followed. I think that they would have to call it something else, and it wouldn't be, I mean, it would be at odds with the open source in the same way that a lot of these source available licenses that we see are. I think it's definitely a hot debate in the community in general. We've seen a lot of talk about like the Fudo license, for example, not being open source, and they went with a different name because of that. But there's certainly other licenses that projects are trying to use, and they still continue to claim to be open source when in reality they're source available. So I think that if OnlyOffice really wants to follow through on having these restrictions in place, I think that would be very at odds with their claims that they are an open source project, which would be a bit concerning because the entire idea of open source is that these forks should be able to exist. And like you should be able to completely fork and create um, this Euro office that Nextcloud is making um, without any restrictions or preservation of only office branding. That doesn't make a lot of sense for a fork to be doing. And so only office is in a bit of a strange situation here. It's always the business case against open source software in general. They don't want people taking their work, and OnlyOffice clearly believes that because they say that they've spent years building a fully functional production-ready Office document editor, but at the same time, they marketed that as an open source project, and that is what people kind of expect from that. I would also note, Nextcloud kind of has a history of forking open source projects in not a very collaborative way. I mean, their Nextcloud itself was forked from OwnCloud, of course, and that division was, I don't think, super well received by OwnCloud themselves. So it's kind of a situation that they're used to, but I think a lot of people side with Nextcloud in that case, and I think that a lot of people are going to side with Nextcloud here as well. So it might just kind of be what it is.
Yeah, and like kind of going back to what you were saying about you mentioned that like a lot of companies they put work into it and then they don't want people stealing that work. It's one of those things where like in that case, and I say this kind of spitefully, but like then just don't be open source. Cause I mean, obviously in a
Yeah.
perfect world, I would prefer everything was, or at very least be, like you said, like be transparent about being source available. Cause in a perfect world, I would love for everything to be at very least source available, because that's how we're able to verify that the code is doing what it's doing, and it helps build that trust. At very least, I think, especially things that deal with security, like password managers should at very least have their cryptographic bits be source available, bare minimum. But because security is something where like everyone benefits, right? But it's to me, it's just such a crappy thing, because that's the risk you take, you know. And I've talked to a lot of projects that are not open source, and I've asked them that. I'm like, why don't you guys have any open source clients or anything? And that's usually the number one reason they give, is they're like, we're worried that people are going to take our stuff and steal it, and we have no real way to control that. And then there's, to counter their argument, there are plenty of companies who seem to be doing just fine despite that. But yeah, so it's I don't know. It's just me. I say this with a little bit of bitterness in my voice towards OnlyOffice. It's like, then just don't be open source. Like it feels almost this is going to be a really niche reference, and I don't think this is as much of an issue anymore. But back in like the early 2000s, there was a real, I don't know if you'd call it an issue or not. I guess it depends on how you feel about it. But a lot of bands would market themselves as Christian bands, because the Christian market would be a lot easier to break into. And then once they hit a certain level of success, they would quote unquote go mainstream. And some of them would even like vehemently deny, like, no, we were never a Christian band. And it's like, well, we have 20 interviews with you where you said that you were. So whatever, dude. But to me, it just feels the same way. It's like, you don't actually believe this stuff. It's just some kind of marketing gimmick. And in this case, the open source, I just feel like that. I mean, I guess in the Christian thing too, it just feels kind of crappy. It's like, you know, don't say that you believe in this stuff just to get a head in the competition. Like, commit to it or don't. So I don't know. That really frustrates me.
Quick thanks to at Sod This All for gifting a Privacy Guys membership. Thank you for your support.
Oh, nice. I just saw that. Yeah. I had comments closed down so I could see the screen a little better. But yeah, thank you. That's super cool. All right. I think that'll take us into a LinkedIn story that Jonah actually alerted me to this story right before we started recording. This one's like hot off the presses.
Yeah, I think this was reported just yesterday or today, if I remember correctly. I definitely saw it only yesterday, but maybe it's been talked about a bit for a while. But there's this report that LinkedIn is illegally or allegedly illegally searching your computer. They are scanning installed browser extensions without user permission. So this is reported by Apple Insider. And something is wrong with my computer. There we go. They say researchers have determined that Microsoft's LinkedIn is scanning browser plugins and other information without permission and building user profiles using data that the company did not get permission to take. A European advocacy group claims LinkedIn is probing browser extensions through its website code. Fairlinked EV published a BrowserGate report alleging LinkedIn detects installed browser extensions by probing for known identifiers through JavaScript. The group says the technique reveals personally identifiable information. And so this is a threat that we've talked about before, I think in a previous episode of this show, but definitely on the forum, where the browser extensions that you install can definitely add to your browser fingerprint and can specifically identify you based on what extensions you have installed. And that's been a known threat for quite a while, but I think this is one of the first, and maybe the largest examples of a real world situation where this is happening. And so if we look at this fair linked BrowserGate website, they point out a lot of different problems with these tools, um, namely that Microsoft is designated as a gatekeeper under the Digital Markets Act in the EU. So Microsoft Windows and Microsoft LinkedIn are both regulated products under the DMA, and they need to allow, as a result, free, effective, high quality, continuous, and real time access to all data, including personal data that's generated through the use of these products, which LinkedIn is not doing because they're doing this in the background. They also point out that this search of all of your browser extensions can reveal a lot of different personal information. And they give some examples of extensions that could potentially reveal that. It could reveal your political opinions, for example, because there are extensions like anti woke, anti Zionist tag, no more Musk that you can install. I don't know what those extensions do, but obviously having them installed definitely uh, shares a bit about what you believe. It could share some, could reveal your religious beliefs because there are extensions like Porta AI, which blur haram content, or Dean Shield, which blocks haram sites. It could reveal potential disabilities or neurodivergence through extensions you have installed, like Simplify, which aids neurodivergent users in browsing the internet. Um, Certainly, LinkedIn could be getting your employment information. There's a lot of obvious ways to do that, but there are job search extensions that people use on LinkedIn, um, where that could reveal information to LinkedIn or your current employer. And then it just reveals a lot of potential trade secrets because LinkedIn is this network where so many professionals are located and they share a ton of information about where they work. And Microsoft would have access to all of that data. And they would also have access to all of the extensions that these people have installed, some of which would be mandated by their companies. So, like whether you use, the examples that they give are Apollo, Zoom Info. You could imagine other browser extensions of like professional tools that would be installed by these companies. Um, I don't know what tools companies use, to be honest. I know like in the education space we would use tools like GoGuardian, for example. And so like in that example, they could find out what we're using. But a similar case would apply to all of these organizations and their employees who use uh, LinkedIn. Um, they say, Fairlinked says in their BrowserGate site that LinkedIn has not disclosed this practice in its privacy policy. There's no mention of extension scanning in any public facing document that LinkedIn has published. And so on this BrowserGate website, which you can find at browsergate.eu, um, they list 6,222 extensions that a hidden JavaScript program on LinkedIn will scan your browser for. I believe this only applies to Chrome browsers, but that's probably most people visiting LinkedIn, I would imagine. Um, and you can't opt in or opt out of that. And there's, again, no mention of any of this happening in any of their privacy policies, which is definitely very concerning. So it's kind of a mass breach of your personal data. They say that this is deceiving EU regulators, which is probably true. And so I think it's just interesting to note for sure that this definitely leads a lot of credence to the idea that your browser fingerprints are going to identify you and reveal a lot of information about you and what you do, especially when it's being done by a company like LinkedIn that has probably a lot of information about you if you use it. It has your real name. Some people ID verify on LinkedIn. They have your whole resume, and being able to tie all of this digital data to those profiles creates a very unique and very comprehensive profile of you when you use the service. So I think it is very concerning for sure, and it shows that the threats that we talk about when it comes to your privacy are, in fact, a real issue, and these companies are trying to get all of this data wherever they can.
Yeah, for the record, I tried to show the browsergate.eu website. For some reason, it's not loading on this the device. It worked fine earlier, but I guarantee you it's DNS. It's always a DNS issue. But yeah, it's my first thought. Okay, so my first thought, because I was recently educated, for general browser fingerprinting, like the day to day, some browsers like Firefox, for example, they do actually try to obfuscate what extensions you have installed. And I guess just to back up a little further, I know that for general fingerprinting, it's not always a guarantee that having more extensions will make you more fingerprintable, because it generally depends on what does the extension do and whether or not it modifies the page. But obviously, this one is going out of its way to scan your extensions, right? So that's a little bit of a different story, which I would argue that general fingerprinting probably does that too. But going back to what I was saying about Firefox, I know Firefox basically tries to, and I'm probably going to get the fine details wrong on this, so I apologize, but they basically try to like randomize the ID that your extensions have to make it a little bit harder for you to be fingerprinted. Do you think that would stop something like this or slow it down, or is it just going to be able to get past that anyways?
It could potentially, but I mean, yeah, it depends on, I'm not sure how these programs work. Randomizing it could work if you can't find the files in the first place, and that probably is a strong protection against it. Um, but if those extensions modify the page itself, which a lot of extensions do, then that probably is still going to be detectable. And so that's only going to protect your privacy against certain extensions you have installed that make public resources available, but don't modify the page, which I don't think would be a ton of extensions, um, especially like password managers. I can imagine where like, if they edit the page itself to add, like, a pop-up or, like, a drop-down menu to logins, that's going to be impacted, so if you disabled all of that autofill stuff and you kept the extension and only, like, manually copied from it on certain pages, it could potentially protect you in that situation, but I don't think most people are, um, doing that. So, I don't know how extensive that protection would really be.
Which even then, my thought process is that kind of defeats one of the advantages of a password manager, which is if it doesn't autofill, that could be an indicator that you're on a phishing page. So if it never
Mhm.
autofills, then you never have that moment of like, wait, am I on the right page? So
Yeah.
yeah. And then I guess my other thought too is just not really a question, but just a thought. It's you pointed out that like this was tested on Chromium browsers, which is probably what most people are going to use anyways. Like um I at my last job, they gave us work computers that came with Microsoft. And I mean, 99% of what I did was logging into the company stuff anyway. So I just use Edge because that's what it came with. And at one point, I think at one point I did get Brave installed on it. And then I was never able to do it again. But I think I did try Firefox because I was like, well, it's not Edge, right? It'll be a way bigger improvement in privacy. But I got really annoyed because everything in a corporate environment is optimized to work with Edge. And so it was just so much extra friction to use Firefox. So where I'm going with this is, yeah, like most corporate environments are probably going to be using either Chrome or Edge because everybody's familiar with Chrome. And where I was going with that is at my job, they said like, yeah, if you go to our little app store, you can download Chrome or whatever. We don't care. Use whatever browser you want. So most people are probably going to be using Chrome or Edge. Maybe some will be using Safari, which I think the article did say that this yeah, Safari users are less likely to be affected by the specific mechanism based on how extension detection typically works across browsers. Apple's browser model limits fingerprinting surfaces. So, but it kind of goes back to it's unfortunate because not everything. How am I trying to word this? It's important to try to compartmentalize your professional life and your personal life, right? Like never do personal stuff on a work computer. For some reason, people do anyways, and I don't know why. But even then, like LinkedIn is something that like you wouldn't get in trouble for doing that on a work computer, I would imagine 90% of the time. But it's also something you would do at home, right? Like LinkedIn is supposed to be something that follows you from job to job to job. It's not necessarily specific to that job. So it is something that I could see people checking on a home device, which is so frustrating because it's like you're trying to I don't know. It's like it's one of those things where like you're not really necessarily doing anything wrong and you're still getting punished, and that's super frustrating. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to point that out. It's
Yeah,
I don't know.
for sure. I mean, a ton of people, I think, their work laptop is their only computer in a lot of cases besides their phone. I think a lot of I know people in that situation. And yeah, definitely do not recommend doing that. You should get your own personal laptop and use that instead. But I know a lot of people do that anyways. Another thing that I wanted to share, not in the notes, but kind of related to this, is browser extensions aren't the only ways that websites can potentially fingerprint you or like software you have installed on your computer. Sometimes the software itself on your computer can work against you. And so, kind of recently, I think this has been going on for a while, but it's been picked up by some news sources. Um, Basically, Adobe Creative Cloud, of course, it's Adobe, um, is changing the host file on your computer. Which allows websites to detect whether you have Adobe Creative Cloud installed. So this is posted to Reddit. Basically, Adobe is adding this line to your host file, and then when you visit the Adobe website, it tries loading an image from that exact domain. And if the image loads because of this line that they've added that points that domain to a specific IP, then they know that you have Creative Cloud installed, and that could, of course, be checked by any number of different websites to detect whether you have Adobe Creative Cloud installed. And so, uh, even if you don't have any browser extensions, there are other ways that software on your device itself can increase your browser fingerprinting profile, um, regardless of what you do with the browser. So that is something to definitely keep an eye out for, because the only thing that would really protect you against this is either not letting Creative Cloud do this, which I don't know if there's a mechanism to do that, but it might be worth looking into, or using a browser like Tor browser, which is going to bypass all of your local network stuff specifically. But that's challenging to do, and not a lot of people are doing that for day-to-day use. And so software that does something like this is a problem. I don't know of any other software that's going to do this besides Adobe, but of course, again, of course, it's Adobe doing that. But yeah, that is another attack vector unrelated to extensions that websites could be using that you'd also have to look out for.
That's insane though. Editing the host file. That's
Yeah.
I don't even like screwing with that. That's some deep level stuff. Oh my god. Wow. These companies are out of control, man.
Yeah.
Oh. My brain hurts.
Just
Okay.
related to that, it's always DNS, right? DNS can be used
Yeah.
against you. DNS is used for evil. Anyways,
Oh
I
my
think that's all
lord.
I have to say. Do you want to talk about our next story here?
Yeah, I my brain is still hurting from the host file thing, so we'll just move on. Uh, so this next story, it helps if I share the actual screen. Here we go. So this next story comes from 404 Media. It says a secure chat app's encryption is so bad it's quote unquote meaningless. Um, I mean, okay, we'll go through it a little bit. So the app is called Teleguard, and I've heard of it a little bit. It actually rang a bell when I read this. Um, I'm not gonna lie, I really wanted a moment where I went and checked the DMs on the forum, because we get a lot of projects at Privacy Guides that message us directly, and they're like, "Hey, you should recommend our product." And we always tell them like, "Go post on the forum. This is a community project. Let the community vet it." So I went and checked, and I thought like maybe I knew their name because they messaged us, but nothing like that, I guess. So I don't know where I've heard it from, but it has been mentioned on the forum once or twice, but never really like heavily recommended or anything. Just I don't know. But either way, yeah. So this is an app that markets itself as a secure end-to-end encrypted messaging platform. It's been downloaded at least 1 million times. But apparently this researcher found, it says there's no storage, highly encrypted, kind of like military grade encryption, right? Anyways, Swiss made. And there's an anonymous researcher in March who contacted 404. They said that the private encryption keys are sent to the company server upon account registration. And Jonah can correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, because I'm speaking a little bit outside my element here, but I think I'm right about this. There are services like Proton, for example, that I don't know if I'd say the private key gets sent to the server, but they do have a way where like you can log in from any device and your email is decrypted, right? But they also store that in such a way where they don't really get the key itself. I could have the details wrong here, but my point being, like, I think there is a way to store private keys, but they weren't doing it this way. They weren't doing it in a way where it's like, we don't have access to your private key. Like, no, they just had your private keys. So yeah, they also, I think it's further down. There's like, they go through like every single issue they found, which is basically like your private key was derived from your user ID. So anybody who had your user ID could plug it into this API and decrypt your messages, which is anybody you message. Or, you know, a lot of people will post their, like, well, Signal, for example, but a lot of people will post their username publicly because they're like, hey, anybody who wants to contact me, go ahead. They said further down that like metadata was stored in plain text. So basically every single mistake you could possibly imagine a company doing or a messenger doing, it seems like they were doing. And oh man, hold on. I do have to find, yeah. So the CEO, after publication, the CEO contacted 404 via LinkedIn, hopefully from a company computer, in a direct message and said, quote, the information is incorrect, exclamation point. The person who gave you the technical information has completely misled you. That person is not competent, exclamation point. The CEO did not provide any evidence for this or point to any specifics. Very, yeah, I don't know. I always like when people do that kind of stuff. Very professional. So is my making fun of them, but whatever. So yeah, I wanted to share this story because I feel like in the privacy community in general, I see a lot of people who I think we get excited about new projects. I think there's two kinds of privacy people. I think there's the people who get excited about new projects and the people who are suspicious of anything new. But I see a lot of people who get excited about new projects and, you know, they're constantly like, oh, there's this new messenger I just heard about. I'm excited to try it. What does everybody think? And like, first of all, I think that's really awesome when you go to other members of the community. Like, what do people think? And because I have seen one of the messages that I mentioned when I was trying to figure out where I've heard of this app before. I went to the Privacy Guides forum and one person was asking like, hey, what does everybody think of this? And a lot of people were like, oh, it's proprietary. Like, this seems weird. This seems weird. There's a lot of red flags here. I don't think anybody did like an actual technical analysis like this person did, but you know, it's good to get that kind of feedback from other people. Like, I'm very open about the fact that I don't really know a lot of code. I did take there's a little app that kind of gamifies learning code, kind of like Duolingo does. And allegedly it taught me Python, but I wouldn't trust me to code anything in Python if I were you. I can now look at Python and recognize it as Python basically. So that said, like, I think it's really good to, in my case, you know, like, hey, I don't know enough about code to understand this. Can anybody else weigh in on this? That's a really good thing. But I think it's just this, be a little bit cautious, right? There's a fine line because on the one hand, if we never trust anything new, we would never have any mass adoption of all these great tools like Proton and Tuda, Signal, SimpleX, like all these really good tools would never get out of the small phase because nobody would ever trust them. But at the same time, we have seen so many apps that shut down, sold. Every once in a while, it does turn out to be a honeypot. Like, and so there's a very fine line between these things. And yeah, I would also ask, especially with chat messengers, one of my personal beefs is I feel like there's an obnoxious amount of messengers. And one of the questions I always ask with any new product, not just messengers, but any new product is, what are you solving? Like, people send me links all the time and they're like, this looks really cool. And I'm like, okay, what is it doing? What is it solving? What problem is this solving that, you know, whether it's a search engine, an email provider, whatever, like, what is it doing that this existing tool doesn't already do? And I'd say about half the time people are like, oh, I don't know. I saw it and thought it was cool. it's got to be solving a problem for me personally. But yeah, so I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this? I think this one may have gone below your radar a little bit, but did you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's all a good takeaway. Thankfully, the only thing I would say is in the case of Teleguard specifically, thankfully we've known about some of the issues with it for a while. I know that they note at the end of this article, Teleguard handed over information to the FBI in around 2014, according to the Washington Post. That article was shared on our forum and in all of the posts where Teleguard is brought up or in the thread about Teleguard itself. So people have known for a while that they can provide information like the push notification tokens and other information, and hopefully are avoiding that. But yeah, it's definitely a good thing to keep in mind because there is a balance, like you said. We do need to have more products in this space, but knowing whether they work well is kind of tricky. And it's always good to keep an eye on this stuff because they certainly do not always work the way that they market themselves, for sure. I wasn't aware until I just read this article that it was made by Swiss Cows. I've heard a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've heard their search engine brought up a few times. I know that they also have a file storage service, which is, as far as I know, just based on Nextcloud and uses like the Nextcloud end-to-end encryption, which isn't the best. So they kind of just seem to be one of those companies where they're just putting stuff out there, probably with open source tools without really adding too much or changing it. I don't know if Teleguard is its own homebrewed product. I would imagine it is because I don't know of any like open source stuff that would be that would have this poor encryption. At least the people who are like forking Element, for example, are getting a reasonably decent encryption implementation, whereas I don't know what's going on with Teleguard. Um, but yeah, I think in this specific case, people already know not to use it, and otherwise, with stuff not like this, it's everything you said for sure.
Yeah, I looked into Swiss Cows briefly. I think the only thing it has going for it is it says, like the search engine, it says that it will censor adult content, which I think could be useful if you have really young kids. Just as like one of those layers of defense, maybe set that as the default search engine on the family computer. And but then we get into the whole topic of like, at what point is it appropriate to kind of transition your kids off that? But I don't know. I remember when I looked into it, that was kind of the only advantage I saw was like, okay, I could see this if I had young kids and I just wanted it as one more layer of defense of like, I don't want them to accidentally find their way onto something bad. But
Yeah, of course, 404 Media does note that Teleguard has a reputation of being linked to cam models and child abusers at the end of this article. So, how much I would trust their approach to child safety, it probably would not be that far. But yeah, in general, it's probably a good idea for companies to be a bit more thoughtful about all of that stuff.
yeah, that's fair. I don't know. I trust 404, but I'm not gonna lie. When I read that part, my brain kind of went to like, I wonder how much Teleguard does get used for that stuff. 'Cause I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
maybe if you
know. I
turn a
just
blind eye to it, I don't know how much they like market it, but I know that like Kick had this reputation. Maybe it still does. I don't know. I don't know anything about
does with
Kick.
me, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've definitely heard this about various messaging apps to the point where like it seems to be like if you have that reputation and it remains, it seems to be kind of intentional. And if it's on the radar of these officers saying that they're notorious for it, that is a bit of a red flag. Of course, with law enforcement, it can always go either way because a lot of law enforcement officers will say Graphene OS, for example, is notorious for being used by criminals when in reality it's just a security tool. Um, but seeing as how this chat app doesn't seem to provide adequate security, um, I don't think it's the same sort of situation.
Yeah, which not to get off topic, but I know I've said in the past, like, because there was that story about a year or two ago about apparently in Spain, just having a Pixel phone automatically makes you suspicious. Like maybe not legally, but in practice, it makes you suspicious because the only people in Spain that have Pixels are drug dealers using graphene. And so it's that my argument when we covered that story back then was like, this is why we need to normalize tools, privacy tools, because if the only people using Signal are, not that they're doing anything wrong, of course, but like dissidents and drug dealers, then like it becomes like, oh, you're on Signal, you have something to hide, which, you know, in some countries being a dissident is illegal. So my point is, I'm not trying to morally group them into the same thing, but my point, it becomes something suspicious. Whereas like if my stepdad is using Signal, probably does not know what it is. I had to download it and put it on his phone and set it up for him and get him in the family chat. He didn't even know it could do video or voice calls. I tried to call him on it one time and he didn't pick up. So I called him on the regular phone and he's like, did you just try to call me on Signal? I'm like, yeah, it does voice calls. He's like, oh, I didn't know that. So, but my point being, like, when everybody's using it, then it takes away from that stigma because they can't point to it and be like, oh, only bad people are using Signal. Really? Really? My 70-year-old stepdad, you think is running drugs from the border? Come on. So anyways, yeah, I know that's a little off topic, but I always feel the need to say that. So I think that'll take us into forum updates, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, in a minute, everyone, we're going to start taking viewer questions. Of course, you can always leave them in the chat anytime. But if you've been holding on to any questions about any of these stories that we've talked about so far, go ahead, start leaving them now here in the chat or in the forum thread for this live stream. Otherwise, yeah, let's check it on the community forum. There's always a lot of activity on the forum every week, so you should always check it out. But here's a couple discussions that we wanted to highlight from this week. The first one is here about Russia's internet blocks. Let me get this pulled up. This was just a discussion on a New York Times piece, which talked about Russian internet restrictions and how Russians are evading them. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game there. So the person who posted this said, as some background, since early March, Moscow and St. Petersburg have experienced widespread mobile internet blackouts, not just blocked apps, but full mobile data shutdowns. Telegram is reportedly being blocked entirely starting in April. The government regulators now have the authority to disconnect Russia from the global internet entirely. In some regions of Russia are on whitelist mode, meaning everything on the internet is blocked except state-approved services like Yandex and government portals. So yeah, this person was interested in whether or not there's a way around this government censorship, which could expand to Europe and North America. The whitelisting situation, that is pretty tricky because that's going to block even like the ability to use Tor bridges, for example. I know that there are like Tor bridges are probably the best way to get around censorship. But if you're in a full whitelist situation, that may not work. At the end of the day, like if your internet service provider isn't going to allow you to make any sort of connections, there isn't much you can do about that besides find an entirely alternative network. So people in this thread note that Russian citizens have started using Meshtastic to communicate, which is a decentralized network that doesn't use the internet at all. It uses LoRa radios, which are small devices that you can connect to your phone to communicate, but they have very limited range, although you can set up a mesh with them. There's probably other solutions, but I think yeah, there's probably not too much you could do from a technical perspective here, that I can think of. Was there anything in this forum thread that you wanted to highlight specifically?
No, it was really just kind of the Russian internet blocks in general. I know when those, when the war in Ukraine first started, I know Russia started cracking down on VPNs, and at the time I was with surveillance report, and Henry really made a good point about how this is one of the drawbacks of a centralized app store. And at the time, we were talking about Apple, but now it seems like we're starting to talk about Android too. Because, with Android and sideloading, which I know people don't like that term, but, Android and installing third-party installs, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of hard for Android to be like, well, we blocked VPN installs, because they can't block VPN installs and Tor installs. Whereas Apple, when Russia came to Apple and was like, hey, remove Proton VPN and NordVPN and all these VPNs, they had no choice but to be like, all right, we'll do, because everything's so centralized and locked down. But yeah, with a total internet blackout, the thing that comes to mind is years ago, again back on surveillance report. So I interviewed John Todd, who was the president of Quad 9, I think. He's from Quad 9. I think he was the president at the time. I'm not sure if he's still there, but it was interesting because we talked about, or it briefly came up about censorship resistance. And something he said that always stuck with me is he's not a fan of DNS over HTTPS, specifically for stuff like this, because if the government starts doing mass blocking at a DNS level and you use something like DOH, it makes your traffic just blend in, and eventually it kind of like, I'm not trying to use language that is sympathetic to a government, for the record, but it kind of backs them into a corner where they just decide to shut off the internet entirely because they can't figure out what traffic is going around the censorship. And I guess he was really ahead of his time with that prediction, because that's basically what we're looking at right now. So yeah, it's a really tricky thing, because how would you, and especially, I don't know, I feel like completely disconnecting from the global internet is a completely different beast that I don't even know how we would handle that. And I guess at that point it's what are you trying to do? If you're just trying to talk to people locally, then yeah, things like Meshtastic, I think, I really want to get into that, but it looks like it would require a little bit of skill just to kind of first time dive in, to figure out the hardware and figure out the install and the apps and the, it feels like a bit of a commitment. But if there's maybe a way to make those things a little bit more user friendly, or I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question, because there's different things you would need in that situation, right? Like, I would need to be able to communicate with my family here in the country, hypothetically, but then I would also need to be able to communicate with the wider internet and get information, which here in the US, unfortunately, we are kind of the wider internet. But in another country, that wouldn't be the case. Or Proton, even I wouldn't be able to check my Proton mail. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
And even
It's crazy.
Meshtastic, that puts people in a dangerous situation. And there's always the possibility that Russia could, both ban the use of it, but also ban the import of Meshtastic hardware. I doubt any of it is being made domestically in Russia. And if anything is or could be, like, the Russian government could stop that. And also just using it, or any sort of radio service, like, you can be trivially tracked. It does have a short range, so, like, it depends where you are, but if people go around, from the government and try to track people down who are using Meshtastic in the future, like, they would pretty much be able to find out who's using it. So there are concerns there. We even talked about in a previous episode, I think it was in Belarus, if I remember correctly, ham radio enthusiasts were being accused of, like, being espionage agents, basically, for using their own, like, radio waves to communicate rather than, like, these government sanctioned things. So it does, like, any of this amateur radio stuff does put you in a dangerous position in a country like this. And especially if it becomes too widespread, it's very easy to imagine that Russia would take a similar position to the internet in general and just blanket ban it because they don't really need it. Um, the other reason this can't really be solved from, like, a technical perspective is, like, I don't think it's something that another country like the United States or someone else could kind of reach in and try to solve for Russian citizens. Like, immediately, what might come to mind is something like Starlink, for example, providing direct access to the internet, bypassing, anything going on in Russia. But Starlink, like, when that technology is in place, we see it used for, um, a lot of different things that the United States and companies like SpaceX definitely do not want to promote or support. We saw in the war with Ukraine, for example, Russian frontline troops were using Starlink extensively to communicate on the battlefield. And that's actually the reason SpaceX does not operate in that region at all and hasn't for many years. And bringing it back for Russian citizens to um, get around something like this would just enable that usage of it again, um, which they definitely don't want to do. So it puts Russians in not a great situation, and really the only solution, like we say for a lot of these very widespread privacy issues, whether it's age verification in Western countries or mass censorship in other countries, like in this case, it's more of a social issue that you have to resolve within your own country, and hopefully people can fight back against this there. Um, because I mean, this should not be unacceptable. I mean, this should not be acceptable. If you know what I mean. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something tricky that I don't know if we're qualified to solve. But I guess if there's any takeaways on this one, it would just be kind of I'm pretty open about having a mild interest in like disaster prep, and sometimes that gets categorized as wrongly. It gets characterized as like worrying about the end of the world, which I don't care about that. But just little things like floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and unfortunately we are in an incredibly digital world, so you have to think about outages and cyber attacks. And so I guess, yeah, if nothing else, this is just kind of a thought experiment of, if you're listening and you're in a situation where you don't have to worry about this yet, just think about it a little bit. Like, don't lose any sleep over it, but what would I do in that situation? And just kind of give that some thought, I guess. So the other forum post we were going to look at, this one, there's probably not too much to say on this one, but there's a new video, YouTuber, this got shared on our forum, that said, if you ran this debloater, reinstall your system immediately. And this is specifically, so for the Windows users out there, that there's a lot of scripts that promise to do all kinds of different things to your system. There's a lot of ones that are popular in the privacy community that promise to remove a lot of telemetry and stuff. There's also some that claim to optimize the graphics and the performance and this, that, and the other. There's even entire Windows ISOs that I want to say it was called Atlas OS. And if I've got that wrong, I apologize to those guys. But there was one that advertised itself as like a gaming distro. And it's basically like you install Windows from scratch using this customized ISO, and it comes pre-optimized for gaming. But the downside is it turns off Windows Defender, which I don't know why you would do that. So yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't watch this specific video, but basically it was not trustworthy. I think it may have even come with actual malware, but don't quote me on that. And so this whole thread is basically talking about these debloaters and stuff. And I think the official position of Privacy Guides is that we don't recommend them because they're tricky. I know there's some that are open source and or source available, I should say. And if you know code and you're comfortable doing it, then sure, you could look through it and make sure that you verify what it's doing. But it's definitely very a lot of these debloaters, you're giving them a lot of power over your Windows system.
Yeah.
And if you're going to use one, you have to be like, come off of a mountain and found a religion positive that this thing is trustworthy, because it would not take much for it to do something malicious, whether that's planning malware, crypto mining, stealing data, whatever. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think I just wanted to take a moment to mention that.
And it's worth noting this tool in question is open source as well. As far as I know, it doesn't come with malware, but it basically acts the way that malware would. There's a pinned comment on this video saying there's a few inaccurate statements, but overall, the conclusion of the video is that like this is all implemented poorly. I do think this is a classic case of like somebody putting something out there without really fully understanding what it does. It may be, I don't want to say whether it is or not, but I think we're just going to see this happening more often as more people try to AI code tools to solve all of their problems without really understanding what they are. Whether or not that's the case in this situation, it's definitely something to look out for when you're running any sort of, scripts that you don't fully understand. I think that is absolutely the most important takeaway here, that you cannot run any of these deep loading scripts unless you know exactly what they do and you see how they're doing it, because at which point you could probably do it yourself, by the way. But um, yeah, all of these scripts like this, they affect the system so substantially. Um, and Windows is already such a not secure and not private platform in the first place that it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me to try and improve it, especially to this degree. Unfortunately, there isn't really a ton that you can do at the end of the day to improve your privacy on Windows, because the operating system itself is going to be constantly fighting against you. Um, so that's unfortunate. It's cool to see more videos from this YouTuber. I first heard about this person who made this video calling the other YouTuber who made the script out because they made a video about Freely around the same time that I published a video about Freely. So they came up in my feed, and I think we had some overlapping complaints. I haven't watched the rest of their videos, but I think anybody who is creating content in the privacy space, that's always a good thing. And so that if they continue to be brought up and they continue to post more useful content like this, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I think there's still plenty of room in the privacy space for more voices for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, real quick, looking through his description on his video, you're right. It doesn't look like it installs malware, but it disables crucial security components and makes your system severely vulnerable to malware. So,
Yeah.
It also makes your system much more unstable and prone to corruption and bricking. I recommend that anyone who ran this tool immediately reinstall a fresh copy of Windows. So yeah, they're dangerous things. You got to make sure they're trusted if you're going to use them at all. And I also totally hear your argument of like, it's already so like such a lost cause that it may be safer for a lot of people to just not even try and just stick to like the toggles and the settings and stuff. So yeah.
Yep. Well, we've been going for about an hour and a half here. We'll probably give a last call for any questions or comments that people want to leave on the forum. I don't think we had any on our forum post today. And I'm not sure if I've seen any in the chat here. So I know there's a bit of a delay on this live stream between when I'm saying this and when you'll hear it. So we'll give people a couple of minutes if you want to add anything else. Otherwise, we'll probably begin to wrap things up. So this is your final warning. Anyone who's watching and wants to chime in on any of these stories.
It's always my favorite part of a live stream is knowing that delay's there. So you say stuff like that, like, hey, we're going to open the floor. And now I have to fill time for a couple minutes and give people time to hear it and write their questions. It just feels so awkward. But yeah, apparently we don't have any questions in the forum here. But somebody
got
just
one question from Hogan in the chat here. There's been a couple of supply chain attacks recently. The current best practice is to always update your apps, but this opens you up to those attacks. Does it still make sense to keep apps updated as recent as possible? Definitely depends on the app. I know you have definitely seen this more prominently in like apps that are built with NPM, probably a lot of web-based apps. But in general, I do think it's probably the safer option to keep your apps up to date versus not updating them, because typically, like, all of these updates are gonna, well, not all of them, because some of them just add features, but most updates that you see are going to be patching known vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that you already see in the wild. And so the potential of like a new update having a 0-day vulnerability that hasn't been discovered yet is probably a lot lower than the potential of using code that almost certainly has known vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So yeah, I would definitely recommend keeping apps up to date, and especially the lower level you go, the more important it is. Like keeping your operating system up to date is super important. As we saw, and I don't know if when we talked about this on the show, but recently iOS had a bunch of updates for 0-day vulnerabilities in Safari and some other security vulnerabilities which were not patched at all in the previous version of iOS. You had to be on iOS 26 to receive some of these security updates. And so it's examples like that where even a company like Apple, which is relatively well known to um, provide security patches to older versions of their operating system, they almost are never doing that super consistently. And in that case, they weren't. And so it's always, I think, a danger to not be fully up to date. It's interesting, kind of related to this. I just installed an app on my phone, and during the setup process, it said you should disable automatic OS updates because they don't validate how it works. And I was like, that's terrible advice. That was a medical device related app. So I think they were saying that because they don't want to because they have to like validate how OS updates work, but it's like that kind of puts all of the users of this device in danger. So that's yeah, sometimes you will definitely see software and advice that are at odds with security advice, but generally, yeah, keep your stuff up to date.
Yeah, I agree. I think I hope that I would be interested to see an actual study on how many like supply chain attacks versus how many like known vulnerability or 0 days are being patched. I'd be willing to bet that the supply chain attacks are more rare just by raw numbers. And something I struggle with a lot in all areas of life is I forget what the name of it is, but it's a logical fallacy because like news is news because it's out of the ordinary, right? Like even the example I like to use is traffic accidents. Like nobody ever goes on, tonight at 5, man gets home from office safely without incident. Like nobody talks about that. And even, traffic, like accidents are so common that we don't even really talk about the accidents that much. It's usually just like, hey, traffic's bad because there's an accident. It's more about the traffic. But it's, news is news because it's unusual. So when we see all these supply chain attacks, it's because I'm guessing there's still the exception instead
Yeah,
of the norm. But that said, I hope kind of a dark way to look at it, but I hope we're seeing enough of them that companies are starting to wake up and realize the importance of securing their supply chain, whatever that may look like. And hopefully we will start to see those go down because
yeah,
if they do become too common, it becomes a problem for the companies too. Because think about it, that's money they have to spend to regain control, kick out the person, try to push out the good code to fix the bad code, the reputational damage, like all of that stuff. So it affects them too. I don't know if we're at that point yet, but yeah.
absolutely. I mean, to take it to the most extreme example, right? Like, you never would ever see a news article today about a new vulnerability in Windows XP or something like that. But everyone knows you can't be using Windows XP on the open internet um, because it's just so insanely vulnerable to all of these attacks. But like we already know you shouldn't be using it. So if a new attack is discovered, that's not going to make the news, and that's going to be the case for I think a lot of apps that you don't keep up to date. Which is why in general I would still say the updates are super important.
Yep. All right. I guess that's all we got this week. So okay.
All right. Well, I think yeah, we can. I'm gonna give the forum thread one more check unless you just did. But it looks like there's nothing else.
Yeah, I've got it open on another window here.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Like usual, all of the updates from This Week in Privacy, we share them on the blog and in our email newsletter every week. So you can sign up for that newsletter or subscribe with your favorite RSS reader if you want to stay tuned about new episodes. And also all of the sources for this episode. That's where we post them all. So if you want links to all the articles we talked about, check that out. For people who prefer audio, we have a podcast available on all podcast platforms and RSS, so you can use your own podcast reader. The recording for this video is also going to be synced to PeerTube like usual, so you can watch it outside of YouTube. Here at Privacy Guides, we are an impartial nonprofit organization that is focused on building a strong privacy advocacy community and delivering the best digital privacy and consumer technology rights advice on the internet. If you want to support our mission, you can make a donation on our website at privacyguides.org. To make a donation, you can click the red heart icon located in the top right corner of our website, or go to privacyguides.org/donate. You can contribute using standard fiat currency via debit or credit card, or opt to donate anonymously using Monero or with your favorite cryptocurrency. Becoming a paid member of Privacy Guides will unlock exclusive perks like early access to video content, early access to the show notes for this show, and priority during the This Week in Privacy live stream Q&A. You'll also get a cool badge on your profile on the forum and the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting independent media. Thank you all again for watching, and we will see you next week.